Whether your beer is in a bottle, can, or glass, kick back and relax. It's better on draft.
Welcome, everybody. Episode 293 Better on Draft podcast. My name is Ken. Thank you so much for joining us. We truly appreciate it. If you are listening to the podcast itself, go on over and check out our YouTube page, youtube.com/Better on Draft. If you're listening via our YouTube page, we appreciate it. Slam that subscribe button, as people will say, and then go check us out on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcast, Amazon, all that stuff. My name is Ken. I am currently drinking a Partake Cherry Goza. But let's go around with my other two hosts right now. We've got Tito. Tito, what are you drinking?
I am drinking the hazy IPA, Partake from Partake Brewing, but I'm also double fisting. I also have that Cherry Goza from Partake Brewing.
That Cherry Goza was so good, and that was the first sip I ever had. Dan, what about you? What do you got?
You know, I'm not going to be, I've got one here, but we're going to start it out right. We're going to go with a clandestine from Saddle Mountain. Can't go wrong with four-time winning GABF medal winner. And then I'm going to try this in a little while. It's room temperature, but I guess we'll see what happens. It's a Partake Pale.
All right. Well, that means if you notice, since all of us are drinking Partake, we've got Partake in studio. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are and what you do for Partake.
Yeah, thanks, Ken, for having me on. Tito, Dan, great to be here with you. I'm Ted Fleming. I'm the founder and CEO of Partake Brewing. We are a dedicated non-alcoholic craft brewery. We're based in Canada, but we've got distribution and great retail partners across the U.S. And a great variety of styles, and all at like an ultra low calorie count, 10 to 30 calories a can, which gets our customers pretty excited. So happy to be on here, guys.
Awesome. Let's kind of break down the origin story. How did you get into the industry? And what kind of made you choose NA beer, since the market's, extremely small, both in content of beer as well as people who wanted it back when you started?
Yeah. So my story kind of goes back to 2005. And that year, I was kind of in my mid-20s and, pretty early in my career, actively playing a lot of sports and socializing a lot. I was living in Toronto at the time, which was a pretty vibrant social city. And, that diagnosis kind of set me back a little bit. I didn't know what it meant. And, a few years later, fast forward to 2010, I was a new dad for the first time. And I ate something or drank something or maybe overdid it and ended up in the hospital for a few days. And that was a big change in my life where I said, okay, I gotta switch gears here, change directions and put my health and my family as priorities in my life. And coming out of that, I said, hey, I'm going to give up alcohol. I'm going to try it. I love beer. It's going to be hard. And, it went with a few fits and starts, but today I don't drink any alcohol at all. And I've got a great alternative in Partake. And I wouldn't have been down this journey without that diagnosis. So in some ways, a negative in your life can turn into a positive.
Is there, when you're making your beer, deciding on your flavors, do you have the ability within your health to be able to at least taste different styles of beer to kind of see where you can dial in, or are you stuck relying on other people's palates?
We definitely rely on other people's palates. Like I can sip and take very small amounts of other beers. So I can sort of match flavor profiles if I have to. So yes, it's not an absolute, but it's very much something that, over the years has become more and more within my control, and I can actually have a few sips here and there without negative consequences. So I try to save those for professional work sips rather than social sips.
Now, before I pass it over to Tito, I did want to ask you one more question, because you mentioned it in the beginning when we were chatting with you that a lot of your beers, first of all, a lot of beers that are NA are still high in carbs, high in calories, high in sugars. Some of them are almost near what a regular alcoholic beer is. Was your brewery's intention at the inception to make these low carb, low cal, low sugar beers, or was it like a happy accident? How did this all come into play?
Yeah, I think when we started, and we were pretty much one of the first movers within craft non-alcoholic beer in North America. At that time, like 2016, 2017, ended up launching in 2017, but working on the product in 2016. There was no such thing as a non-alcoholic craft beer, and most of the non-alcoholic beer that existed for whatever styles there were out there were pretty terrible. And so our primary goal was just get a beer that tasted like craft and tasted good. And the calorie piece wasn't even really on our radar screen. And it was, in some ways we call it a hoppy accident rather than a happy accident, because our first beer was an IPA. But yeah, it was a bit of a surprise and a result of I think what is today a fairly unique brewing process.
Well, we were hoping to have Nick in as he slowly is making his way into the studio. So I'll ask you, talk to me about the Cherry Goza. What am I tasting in this beer? What's the flavor profile that I'm getting? Obviously, I'm getting cherry. I'm getting salt. I'm getting a little bit of bitterness, like a sourness. But what else am I getting out of this Cherry Goza?
Yeah, I think there's a little coriander in that as well that adds a unique dimension to the beer. Our Goza line in general, it started with the peach Goza. The cherry is our second iteration within the Goza family, but it's meant to be refreshingly sour. So it's an easy drinking beer, has a slight sourness to it. So it doesn't come across as sweet, but it brings those fruit flavors with it that I think are pretty interesting and pretty refreshing within beer.
Yeah, when I taste a sour and I taste something that's definitely in the Goza, the farmhouse area, like a Jolly Pumpkin or a Barrel and Beam out here in Michigan, like those beers really knock me like right in the face. It's almost like a punch. It's just overpowering. Did you want that for this beer, or was your goal to also be a little bit more entry level regarding the sourness?
Yeah, I think more entry level, and I think that extends across like our entire product line. Like I think one thing that we've held very high in our mind is we were doing craft beer for a lot of people who drank non-alcoholic beer before but didn't have any exposure to craft because they may have given up alcohol before the craft movement really took place. So we wanted to be a very accessible craft beer company. So all our products are named very simply, like IPA, Pale Ale, Blonde Ale, Goza. So it's accessible from a name perspective, but it's also accessible from a style perspective. So our IPA is meant to be very traditionally like a West Coast IPA. The Pale Ale is quite accessible. So accessibility is something that's important to us as a brand, and it comes from probably that origin of really wanting to be inclusive to a group of people that probably didn't feel very included within the beer community earlier on.
Now, Nick, welcome to the show. What are you currently drinking?
It's like you guys brought in the Cherry Goza at the best time, because that was the first thing I cracked open was the Cherry Goza from Partake. And as Ted had talked about names and simple and just keeping it simple, then got the Pale open as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to pass it over to Tito because I know Tito's got some questions for you.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Got some questions for you, Ted, because I noticed, just off the question that Ken had asked you about, your beers being a lower calorie, content, more of a, you want to say like a healthy side. So I was looking at your website. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you got on a journey, or it sounds like you want to take Partake to being an adulting beer. Can you talk a little bit to us about that and what that mission, what's behind that mission?
Yeah. So like early on in my journey, like I had a lot of customers who looked a lot like me, like they gave up alcohol because they had a health or medical condition. They may have had issues with addiction, whether themselves or someone in their family that took them into the non-alcoholic sphere. And today things are so different. Like we're seeing so many more customers come to us, and I'm sure it's the same for some other non-alcoholic beer companies where, companies like ours, like Partake, have just raised the bar so much higher from a non-alcoholic beer perspective, where, we can have this conversation. We can all be drinking a non-alcoholic beer, and it's like, it's a good beer. It tastes, these are all good versions of the styles that that they're intended to be. And, you're seeing people look at that and say, hey, look, this product tastes good. It's low in calories. I maybe just like having one or two beers with my friend and then going off to put my kids to bed, or I got some more work to do, or what have you. I've got an early morning the next day, and it makes that socializing and connecting over beer really easy. It's enjoyable. It's refreshing. It tastes great. It's low calories, and it doesn't hold you back. If you maybe have one non-alcoholic beer too many, you're still good to go tomorrow.
I'll tell you one thing. I really enjoyed, riding through, learning more about you, learning more about Partake, because also in some of your blogs and some of your early blogs, you give a lot of education behind on being healthy and what does, and like for hops, like saying the one article you had that hops helps you sleep, it's something I never knew about that, so it was just, I just wanted to point that out and just say that was really, I really enjoyed, learning that piece and whatnot. So you're actually putting out some really good information out there and content for the community. Really appreciate that.
Yeah. Like that was like the sleep piece, like just to pick up on that, like for me, when I gave up alcohol, like that was probably the one thing that I experienced in a positive way more than anything else, was that I wasn't sleeping more hours, but the quality of the sleep that I had and the hours that I got, I was a new dad at the time. So I had some young children at home, like getting woken up quite a lot. But when I did get to sleep, the quality of that sleep, I noticed to be much higher quality. And that, that's a huge benefit to me in my life today.
Okay. And jumping back to, you talked about earlier about your Crohn's disease and how you don't drink alcohol that much anymore. You got like 10 different options on your website, for NA beers that you're selling. Was there some of these styles that you've tried or had trouble getting dialed in just right, just because of not being able to taste to get that profile right?
Yeah. So one of the smart things I did early on in this business was hire someone who's really good at brewing, and I didn't have to do that anymore. So I worked on some of the initial prototypes and the initial early batches, but today we have a brewer that, he's got a 40-year career in brewing, well established, making alcoholic beer, and he's someone we lean on heavily to make sure that the styles are dialed into what they're dialed into a degree that an alcoholic beer drinker could drink one of our beers and be completely satisfied that they're getting what they thought they were getting from a style and taste perspective. So, our team's done a phenomenal job at that. And I'd say, by and large, when we go out into market and are sampling with consumers and say, hey, try this beer. What do you think? Oh, it's a great IPA. Oh, did you tell it was non-alcoholic? And most of them are like, no way. Like that's better than what I'm actually drinking at home.
That's awesome.
So that's amazing feedback. Cause I think when I started, I didn't think that was, even I probably didn't think that was possible.
That's awesome. All right. Well, I'm gonna pass it over to Nick. He's got some questions for you.
So you guys just recently completed, about a couple months ago, a Series B financing effort. A couple years ago, you guys did your first round, Series A. You basically quadrupled, based on what my research, in your second round of fundraising from your first round. When you were getting ready to do the second round of fundraising, knowing that this is an NA style of beer, it's kind of niche to a degree. How nervous were you about going the second time around in trying to get investors to buy into something that it's still kind of niche in a degree in the craft beer world? How nervous were you when you were starting the second round of financing for Partake?
Yeah, I would say I was less nervous than the first time. The second time, you learn a lot having gone through it once. To be honest, there was a lot more positive things we could point to the second time around. We had, 4 or 5 times the sale. We had additional retail counts. There were, the big brewers that were in it, like Heineken and Budweiser. And in our home market where we started, we were beating those companies in sales and in volumes and, some things that you would think are just absolutely crazy when you see the numbers of what, what we're doing compared to some of those global behemoth type companies. So we had a really great story to go into this most recent round of funding. And I think generally speaking as well, I think there's, as I talk about like that evolution of our customer, there's a lot of data sources out there that are suggesting that, people are looking to moderate. They still enjoy their socializing. They still enjoy their craft beer. They're flexible around they might drink seltzers a bit more. They might drink lower ABV beers a bit more, and they're drinking non-alc beer more. So our total addressable market went from like this people who only drank non-alcoholic beer to this much larger addressable market of people who are being a little bit flexible around drinking alcohol and not drinking, but still drinking beer at the same occasions. So I think that was a fundamental shift in mindset that allowed us to say, hey, look, the potential of our business is quite large, because now we're hitting almost all craft and all beer consumers, not every day of the week, but maybe a few days a week.
Could you take a moment and explain how the NA market is in Canada compared to how it is here in the United States? We're starting to see more companies here in the United States pop up that are specializing only in NA beer. We had Athletic Brewing here. Oh, brother, Ken, help me out. How many years ago? That was pre-pandemic, wasn't it?
No. Well, they launched.
Oh, no, it was at the beginning. It was beginning, wasn't it?
Yeah, we had them on the show right at the beginning of the pandemic, right when they opened up their San Diego brew house.
Yeah. So talk about how the differences between the Canadian market and the American markets for NA.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll add Europe in here too for a little flavor. So like Europe, like that was almost a case point for companies like ours.
As like Athletic Brewing here.
European non-alc beer is maybe 5, in some cases over 10% of total beer market. Very well developed in countries like Spain and Germany. You can go out and get like 20, 30 types of non-alcoholic beer. I was just in Germany last month, and it was great. Every town I went to had a different non-alc beer that was associated with the local brewery. So, Europe was the sort of the guidepost. And then Canada is kind of, culturally speaking, is kind of a little bit more European than the US, but far more American than Europe. And so, we were this natural progression where I think our consumer base was a little bit more ready for non-alc beer. We got a great start. Budweiser and Heineken, I think, both launched their non-alc rebrands in Canada before taking it to the US. So we were in an interesting, culturally speaking, but also from a being just maybe a bit more European orientation. So I think the Canadian market is further ahead than the US in like total non-alc penetration as part of total beer. But I think the US is going to catch up really fast. So, again, it's great product that is now available that wasn't available before. And this whole health and wellness trend driving people towards moderating their alcohol consumption, not necessarily giving it up completely, but moderating. And then when they moderate, they're also looking for, lower calorie options, things with natural ingredients. And, that's where we excel at Partake, is just having maybe the best in class taste to calorie experience in all of beer.
I'm about to pass it on, but I just want to make one quick comment real quick. You guys were talking about the Cherry Goza. This is the first one I cracked. Not a huge fan of cherry in general, but if I recommend it to anyone listening, anyone watching on the socials, highly recommended. This is really freaking good. The Cherry Goza you made me a believer, and made me someone to like cherries, maybe potentially. I don't know, but this is pretty good. I just want to make that quick comment.
I thought Nick, I thought Michigan was known for its cherries.
It is. The Cherry Festival in Traverse City was just last weekend, as a matter of fact. So, and I believe the Cherry Pit Spitting Competition, the World Cherry Pit Spitting Competition, typically held over the 4th of July in Mackinac City, was just, a couple weekends ago. So yeah, you're right. But we like what we like, I suppose. So.
You can get into the cherry. You can jump on the cherry bandwagon now.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. There we go. I believe, Daniel, am I passing it to you next?
Yeah, go for it. So I'm curious here because it says on your website that you were actually brewing any beers at home. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? I'm a pretty avid home brewer. I'm curious about the process and how you came about doing that.
Yeah, they were terrible.
I love how you're so blunt when you say that. Yeah, they were terrible. Like, oh wow.
Yeah, we. I don't know. So I'll give you the background story. So I'm sitting in a bar with a friend of mine. He's a much better home brewer than me. He'd won a bunch of these awards, and I was never a competition guy. I was just more a casual guy. But he was a competition guy, and he'd won all these awards. And I'm like, sounds like you don't have any challenges left. So why don't you have this next challenge? Help me make a non-alc beer. And he'd probably had a few beers at that time, and so I think he agreed to something that he probably regretted. But the price I had to pay was I had to buy him alcoholic beer for the time that we were working on this, which was actually about 6 months. So it was still a good business decision for me. But anyways, we spent some good time together. We had some horrendously bad batches. We had some batches that were like, oh, not bad. And then when we were able to replicate not bad, then we used that kind of as the prototype to take to a professional brewer and put onto a professional scale system. And it was still like, even today, our beers are a work in process. Like my view is our beers are never done. They can always be improved in some way, shape, or form. So we're always looking to do that. But going back to the home brewing, like we tried various methods of alcohol removal, and like on the stovetop, we tried low gravity beers. We tried hybrids of things, a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error. And, I'd say we got 70% of the way there with the homebrew system. And it was when we took it to a professional brewer, and we actually got some research and development funding, because what we were doing was quite novel at the time. And we're able to really hone in on, what would make a good non-alcoholic beer from the prototype. So, I don't think if we only took it from homebrew to commercial, it would have turned out as successful as it was. I think we had this really important step in between where we did lean on professional resources. We even had a guy who was had a PhD in microbiology, was head of quality control for Molson globally, and instead of a baseball card collection, he had 25,000 strains of brewer's yeast as his collection. And when I heard that, I was like, that's the guy I want on my team.
Yeah, not a bad guy to have, for sure. Now, we noticed that you started the website premiumnearbeer.com back in 2013. Did you think that any revolution that we're seeing now was it going to start a little bit earlier, or were you just getting ready by starting the site?
Yeah, so that was 2013. That was sort of when I was getting myself into really I'm not drinking anymore. I'm strictly drinking non-alc. And I saw that all this stuff, like I talked about Europe earlier, like there's these great products, great breweries in Europe making this product. And so I was like, oh, someone's got to be selling it online. Went online, found a store, put a bunch of stuff in my cart, went to check out, and they're like, no, we're in the UK. We won't ship to North America. Disappointed for about half an hour. And then I was like, well, I'll start that in Canada then. And, I started importing beer, and I was like, my business plan was like it works in the UK. I want this business to happen. Hopefully there are other people like me. And if it doesn't work out, I'll just drink all the beer. So that was my business plan at the time. And so that started, and it actually was quite successful. And it was the community I built around that was really instrumental in kind of pushing me towards bringing in, creating craft non-alcoholic beer. Around 2015, 2016, the customers started asking me, hey, Ted, can you get craft non-alcoholic beer? And I went out to breweries and I said, look, I got this really passionate customer base. I've got this sales channel that's pumping out a couple $100,000 a year, which, wasn't too bad. And, they're asking for craft. Will you help me do this? And, most of them just said, no, forget it. And so that's kind of what got me to that conversation with my friend about, hey, can you help me make a craft non-alcoholic beer brand of my own?
Now, you got my curiosity to follow up on that a little bit. Where I'm at here in the US, I'm in Arizona, so I can have non-alcoholic craft beer shipped to me. I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the three of you, you can't have it shipped to you commercially in the state of Michigan. Is that correct?
Correct.
So what's it like in Canada? What are the rules as far as shipping NA beer goes?
I think our rule makers are quite sober, and so they, think it makes total sense to have a non-alcoholic product that can be shipped by FedEx.
Makes sense. Yeah. Well, here, understandably, is it different between provinces? I know here we have 50 settler rules as far as the shipping goes, which is why it's, hey, I could be here, but drive 10 minutes away to the next state and I can't have it shipped here because of reasons.
Yeah, I think, we could get into a multi-day discussion on the history of the 3-tier system and things like that. The issue in Michigan is a result of 3-tier to some degree, and non-alcoholic beer historically only being made by big brewers falling within 3-tier. And in Canada, we don't have quite that same history. And so our product is treated as a food product. It's labeled as a food product, and it's able to be distributed as a food product.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, talking about the NA. Now, here in the US, NA beer is required to be below 0.5% ABV. Do you get any flack for calling your beer NA when it's actually at about 0.3%?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? Like, again, pointing to Europe, they use the two terms, alcohol free being like a 0.0 and then non-alcoholic being less than 0.5. So they use that distinction. I think here in North America, non-alcoholic is the commonplace name. You look at legacy brands like O'Doul's, that's how people refer to the product category. So we're comfortable with that as a descriptor for our category. And look, you're still seeing challenges around the guys that do call their product 0.0, not actually living up to that level of dealcoholization. And I think for us, like, we made a conscious decision. We said we could make a 0.0 beer, but and we've tried and prototype, but we think we can get a lot more flavor and taste. And that was really the thing that was important to us, was getting the taste bang on. And we think that even that small amount of alcohol in our mind makes a huge difference in taste.
Makes sense. Now, one more question before I pass it on here. Out of curiosity, what are some go-to NA products outside of your own beverages?
Yeah, so where I'm at is it's a bit of a different subset than in the US, but I'll give you a little taste of what I do when I go to the US as well. So there's a lot in Quebec, actually, in the largely French speaking province in Canada. A lot of amazing non-alc beers coming out there. So that's generally like where I like products from on the Canadian side of the business. Let me think in terms of specific brands. There's a brand called Groovy that works on both sides of the border. That's I've liked some of their products. I think Athletic, in terms of like having product dialed in across different styles, like us, they're pretty dialed in across different styles. I think other products in the market are a bit hit or miss when it comes to styles. Like some companies make a really great stout and others make a great IPA, but I think in terms of companies that make a good version of a variety of styles, there still are very few companies, one of which is Partake.
All right, going to pass it over to Ken. He had some more questions for you.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier in the show going to Germany and how a lot of breweries would have a non-alc beer that's representative of their brewery. How, without assuming all these breweries don't have their own dealcoholizer, how are they doing that?
Yeah, my understanding is that in Europe, the process called arrested fermentation is much more common than in North America. So that's a process where they would take the wort, subject it to cold temperatures before the yeast metabolizes sugars into alcohol, and then that would become the beer. The challenge there is those types of beers tend to come across as sweeter because there are those unfermented sugars in the beer. So I think that is a much more common production method within Europe.
I was just curious because we've talked about it here on the show that a lot of breweries want to dip their toes into NA beers, but without like a full process of having a dealcoholizer, it seems almost impossible for a lot of these breweries. So I was curious, as you said, that all these breweries in Germany are doing it. I'm assuming they don't have their own giant machine that can take the alcohol out. But we're hoping, like, I would love to see a company like in Michigan, we have Two Roots, and I would love to see the ability to contract out their dealcoholizer to like have somebody bring in their beer and, you know, try to make an NA beer contract wise. But as we kind of talked about within Michigan, it, you know, red tape is just a pain in the ass. And for us, we consider NA beer, quote unquote. Like, we don't consider it food. We don't consider it beverage. We consider it beer, which is why you can't ship beer in Michigan, let alone NA beer. Now I want to talk about this blonde real quick that I'm drinking. What am I getting out of this? I see that it's just got water, barley, hops, and yeast. So how are we getting this amazing blonde flavor?
Well, the hops we use are nugget hops, so they're sort of a UK based hops, but this is meant to be, you know, super easy drinking. You know, you guys don't kill me on this one. I enjoy it really cold with a lime in the summer, and super refreshing beer. And yeah, 15 calories for this whole can. So it's funny. Like my team and I, we joke around about like, okay, if you are in the act of drinking up and down from your mouth, you're probably burning 15 calories in that act of drinking. So, you know, we basically tell people have as many as you want.
So it's a real 12-ounce curl.
That's right.
For when people make jokes. Now, we noticed that in 2018, you participated in a television show called The Dragon's Den, which is a Canadian version of the US's Shark Tank. So you went there, you made a pitch. Talk to us about what it was like to make a pitch in there, especially, you know, 2018, you're still in the early days of what we consider like the modern NA revolution.
Yeah, we weren't commercial yet at that point. I had a prototype that had gone through that professionalization process. So it was actually like the liquid was really good, but we didn't have the packaging nailed down. It was,
so it wasn't one of your backyard brews.
No, it wasn't a backyard brew. It was professional. It was really good. But like, again, like it was still done on like, we'll put it into an individual bottle. Like we made 6 bottles and went on the show. So in hindsight, I probably should have waited a year and had like real packaging and real, you know, some real sales behind it. But nonetheless, I signed up for the show. I had, I don't know if you guys seen snippets of the episode, but I had this cargo bike outfitted with a draft tap on the front, and I didn't live that far from the film studio at the time. So I was like, I'll just ride, instead of renting a van, because I had no money, I'm not going to rent a van to drive this thing down. I'm going to ride it down to the studio. But the day I did it, they wanted us there for 7 a.m. Torrential downpour, huge storm. Like I showed up just soaked. And, you know, I thought I was going to have to just go right on stage from there, but I had to wait 7 hours to get on. So I was dry by the time I got on, but that was the start of the day. And then, the waiting was actually the hardest part. Then I went on, I rode my bike onto the set, ring the bell. And, you know, I just got the beer out there, tried the beer with the dragons in that case, or the sharks, as people might be familiar with. And, you know, had one person spit it out and ask for a glass of wine from off stage. So clearly, like, that was a setup.
It wasn't Mr. Wonderful, was it?
No, he was. He had moved from Dragon's Den to Shark Tank the year before.
Oh, okay, all right.
I didn't get the pleasure of his input.
Maybe that's a blessing in disguise. I don't know.
Yeah, perhaps. Anyways, I had one person on the show who she was a beer person, and she's like, "This is a really good IPA," and you know, I'm pretty grateful for that feedback, because that could have been like a pretty awful experience were it not for the person who is most knowledgeable about beer saying that this is an exceptionally good product. It's an exceptionally good IPA, and it's non-alcoholic, and no one's done that before. So, you know, it came out, you know, if that's the only thing I came out with, that was a great way to come out of that show.
Yeah, we for those of you in the Midwest, we get a lot of Chicago and Wisconsin and Minnesota people. So the person who you're referring to is Manjeet Minhas, and she owns one of the largest breweries in the U.S. Outside what's in Wisconsin. Not a big distro brewery, but obviously, if you're familiar with it, they produce a lot of liquid over there. And she actually gave you a offer on the show. But that didn't necessarily go through. Talk to us about how that kind of went from the offer to her saying we think you're there. Like, give us a little explanation of how that all happened.
Yeah, so I left the show with a TV deal, if you will, and the TV deal was, I think I was 50% of the company for a couple $100,000. So it wasn't very much, but it in many ways it's getting a deal on TV, like for anyone listening that might be going on Shark Tank or thinking about it, like getting a deal on TV is just an invitation for a future conversation. And that's what I wanted to get out of going on the show, was an ability to have a real conversation with some of these people. And, she and I talked a few times afterwards. And as it turned out, I was living in Toronto at the time. I ended up moving to Calgary a few years later, which is where she's based. But anyway, she said, look, like, you're a smart guy. You've got something really good here. Like, take it further and let's have more conversation. And, we never ended up working together from an investment point of view, but, she's been a support. I can call her up and, she'll answer my calls. So just really appreciative of her input over the years and her support and, what she said on the show, which was huge. And it was a huge validation of what I was doing. And if she had said this is a terrible product, who knows? Maybe I would have gone out of there and said, maybe this isn't what I should be doing.
Dan, I think you're drinking the pale, aren't you?
I am drinking the pale, yes.
Why don't you tell me about it?
It's okay. I'm not the biggest, totally getting put on the spot. But it's okay. I'm not the biggest NA fan unless it's a stout, because pales, outside of a Sierra Nevada, I'm probably not going to drink it, but this is drinkable. I could definitely have one or two if I've been pounding, 10% beers for the last few hours.
That's Dan, like, let's base set here. That's a warm beer, right?
It is a warm beer. Yes, it is a room temperature beer. That is absolutely correct.
Wait, Daniel, it's not 120 degrees in Arizona type of warm, right?
No, we're talking room temperature. I've got it set to like 77 in the house.
Out of curiosity, what is the temperature in Arizona today?
It's like 112 today, 113, something in there. Yeah. Yeah, it's about that.
Dan, you mentioned the stout, and one of the questions I wanted to ask, because we didn't get it in the little gift pack. So your beer is now called a Partake Dark. Oh, how does, like, we had One Drop on, and he kind of gave us a cliff notes. Why are they called darks now and not stouts?
So the same liquid, same beer in Canada is called stout. The United States, again, tied to three-tier, the history of prohibition, there are certain words that you cannot use if you're a non-alcoholic beer. Lager would be one, stout would be one. And I think in today that doesn't make sense. Again, I think it was just kind of some of these barriers around. And I think it was sometimes to some degree consumer understanding too. Like a lager, you would normally associate with a alcoholic beer, right? So, but I think today consumers are aware enough that they could look at they could differentiate between a non-alcoholic lager and a alcoholic lager. I think they could figure that out. But it's just a historical anachronism from prohibition in my mind.
You say customers are smart enough, but we're going to be chatting in our news segment after our interview today about a brewery out of Kansas City that's made a seltzer called Snowmelt, and are getting sued because it's part of their electrolyte series, and they said it is misleading and dangerous to customers because they felt like it was a nutritional and energetic beverage. So, as your faith in humanity might be bigger than ours, but that might be the Canadian in you showing, for sure. Let's before I throw it to Tito to talk about the hazy that he's drinking. Where do you want to see Partake here in the next coming years? Do you expect them? Do you expect to expand a little bit further outside of your your 10 current beers? Are you going to stay in the beer territory or move into other products? What is your goal you see for Partake?
Yeah, so I see us being on a long-term mission. Like I think we've still got a lot of work to do, sort of breaking down the negative stigma that it still exists in society around people who don't drink or moderating or drinking less. I want in 20 years to be able to say in any situation I'm not drinking or I'm drinking a non-alc beer, and that to be just completely like normal, right? No one kind of like looks at you funny. No one says, "Oh, are you an alcoholic?" Everyone's just like, "Hey, cool." Right. So we got a lot of work to do on that front. My initial job and the job of some of the other companies that were early on in the space was to like just make non-alcoholic beer good. Like, right. It was terrible for decades. And our job was to make it good and to make it, exciting and interesting. And we've done that with the varieties that we've brought to the table, and we're like constantly innovating. Most of our innovation comes through our e-commerce site. So, we've done a lime beer recently. We've got a whole slew of new innovation coming out next year. So we're still pushing the envelope on styles of beer that haven't been made in non-alc before. But our larger mission is around that societal change and making not drinking, sobriety, moderation, making all those things totally acceptable and making people like me feel like, hey, I can go out and have a beer with you guys and just feel like I'm one of the guys, normal, nothing's up. Everyone feels comfortable. So, we've got our short-term game plan that's going really well, but we've got a lot of work ahead of us from a larger societal perspective. And then, where does innovation go? For me as a consumer, if I put on my consumer hat, I'd like to make everything, right? Like I'd like to do like these 30 styles of beer and non-alc, but the business in many ways dictates that we have to be a bit slower, a bit more measured in how we do things. So, that's just a reality of having a business and having employees and other constraints. So we are innovating. It's just at a very deliberate pace these days.
Okay. So Ken wanted me to talk about it, but this hazy IPA, so I think I'm the only one right now that's drinking it. I'm going to tell you right, to be completely honest, I'm not a big IPA person, but this was really good. Because I know on the side of the can here, it says, you get tasty notes of ripe apricot, sweet mango, and juicy berries, and you get all that. But then in ingredients, it says water, barley, hops, yeast, and oats. How do you get the flavor in there with just that? Is that just a trade secret?
Yeah. So somewhat it's process, which is trade secret. Some of it's hops, and there are amazing hop varietals out there with those that you can get those types of notes. Most of the flavor profile within the beer comes from the hops choices, more so than the grain and barley choice.
Okay. So sounds like your savvy business conversations you had with your brewer, picking a guy with the trading cards of hops kind of paid off, because that was pretty good. That was really good. I was impressed with that.
I was pleasantly surprised with that one. I find our hazy IPA to be incredibly drinkable. It gives you like that hops, a lot of the hops aroma and taste. It's not as bitter as our standard IPA. Our standard IPA is higher IBU, and I think that's actually a really nice, flavorful but drinkable IPA.
Okay, I'm gonna have to try that IPA too. But the hazy one, I really like that hazy one. So pass it back to Ken.
Yeah, Ted, we appreciate you coming on the show tonight. As we end all of our shows, we're each going to ask you just a final question, something fun, lighthearted, and then everybody that's listening will give you the opportunity to kind of chat about where you can get Partake. We'll mention a few places here locally, which, Metropolitan, which is a huge buyer, Arbor Farms, a lot of craft beer stores. If they're selling NA beer, they're definitely carrying Partake. But Dan, what's your final question for Ted?
All right, Ted, you get one night free and clear where you can drink whatever you want with no repercussions. What are you going to drink and why?
Oh, guys, I'm gonna maybe disappoint this audience, but I'm gonna go into wine, and that's I think I'm spoiled because I have great non-alcoholic beer that I can have. I don't have that in wine, and so when someone I'm out with is having like this really nice bottle of wine and I can smell it across the table, it does kind of drive me nuts sometimes. So that's where I would go, and it'd probably be a Chateauneuf de Pape from France.
We've had. Is there just no distributors of NA wine up there, or is it just lack of choices? Because we have a good handful number of NA wines here in the States right now.
Yeah, I haven't found any that have cracked the code.
Gotcha.
Just grape juice.
Nick, what's your final question?
If it's not a wine that you were going to indulge, what beer would you be indulging that's not NA?
Yeah. So if it's beer, okay, you're gonna corner me on that one.
Yeah.
I got my way to get in there. I'll figure it out.
So yeah, so when I lived in Ontario, one of my a lot of the drinking I would do would be out like north of the city in the woods type of places, and there's a few cottage breweries north of Toronto, one of which is called Muskoka Brewing. I'm fan of their beers, so they're great. Sierra Nevada, when I could get it fresh, oftentimes in Canada it's maybe not at its best, but when I was in the States, I love Sierra Nevada Pale Ale.
All right, very good.
Tito.
So, with the boom that the resurgence that we're seeing in NA beers that are coming up, because it seems like they're going to continue to be here and they're going to stick around for a while. One question I had for you is, do you see in the horizon of the NA business, do you foresee maybe an NA tap house coming about? Is that something that you thought about pursuing or whatnot?
Yeah, we have been making draft beer, and obviously your podcast is called Better on Draft, so I'm glad we got to the headline here. But we were making draft beer, draft versions of our beer prior to COVID. COVID, with the food service industry going through a lot of challenges, we stopped that, but we're going to look to bring that back. And then, I think there's interesting opportunities around tap rooms for non-alc, whether that's a standalone, whether that's complementary to alcohol. Again, going back to like what I was saying about, I don't necessarily associate and only hang out with people that don't drink. Most of my friends do drink. So we want to go out to a place that accommodates all of us. And I think, our product is top notch. It deserves a draft handle, and it deserves to be next to some other great beers. So that's what I would like to see is our beer on tap next to other alcoholic beers that are just quality beers. And, groups of people can go out and say, hey, this is a great place to go because there's something for everybody.
Okay. As someone who I spent 7 or so months sober over the past year, a lot of people who listened saw me go through the gambit of NA beers. And one of the things I did was I had like a Heineken 00 while watching a college football game with a bunch of friends. And what I would tell people, and I think this is what we always talk about when we have Kyle Vandevender's op-ed on our website, betterondraft.com, is to just do it. Most of your friends don't actually care. And the ones that do care will call you out. You need to, rethink about who you're hanging out with if that's going to be an issue with them. But Larry Lim has a question, which I'm going to use as my question. Larry wants you in our chat to make a Tim Hortons and a coffee porter. Now, obviously, Tim Hortons is a Canadian. It's just Canada. Tim Hortons is just basically Canada. Do we foresee maybe a coffee porter coming into fruition anytime soon?
Ooh, good question. Tim Hortons, if you're listening, give me a call. But, do we have to get Justin Bieber involved too? Because he's doing everything Tim Hortons right now is like Justin Bieber, Tim Hortons stuff too. So,
I mean, if you don't have to pay for it, you might as well get giant publicity from... one of the world's largest pop stars.
Anyways, I like where you're going, Larry. I appreciate that. Let's huddle up on that idea.
All right. So Partake, where can they find you online? Do you guys deliver to the States other than Michigan? What's up?
Yeah, Michigan's awesome. I love Michigan. Like I told you, Ken, I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie, so spent a lot of time in Michigan. But
that's not the Michigan they're from. They don't know anything about that.
The real Michigan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, easiest place to find us is on drinkpartake.com. You can get us across the country, except in Michigan. And, retail partners. We got some great retail partners across the country. Binny's, you mentioned Chicago earlier. Binny's is a great partner for us in Chicago area. Wegmans in the Northeast, Bevmo, Total Wine, lots of others. Visit our website. We've got a list of where you can find us.
Yep, you can. I did it earlier today. You can actually just put in your zip code and it'll tell you where you are. Ted, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. And that's going to do it for this episode 293 of the Better on Draft podcast. We're almost at 300. No matter what you think of your beer, we think it's Better on Draft. Have a good night.
Peace.
Thanks, guys.